Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this, because we are going on a really fascinating journey today. We're looking at the evolution of transportation, but, not just as a dry timeline of dates and names. We're going to explore how human ingenuity totally evolved. We'll start from the early days of purely mechanical problem-solving, where the literal only goal was getting from point A to point B, without dying, all the way to the boundary-pushing, wildly imaginative, and just flat-out rebellious designs of the 1970s.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll hit the dawn of vehicles, the evolution of wheels and rails, autos and aircraft, the rebels of design, wedge cars, and we'll wrap up with the legacy of design.
All right, Part 1, the dawn of vehicles, conquering the elements. So, let's look at the early problem solvers. Their main goal was basically just to conquer the physical elements around them, right? And they started with water. For centuries, boats were made of wood and relied entirely on wind or human muscle. But in 1807, an American engineer named Robert Fulton did something absolutely revolutionary. He took James Watt's recently invented steam engine, tweaked it, and actually managed to put it in a wooden boat. And after a lot of trial and error, his creation, the Clermont, hit the water. It became the world's first commercial steamboat. Fulton proved that these heavy, clunky machines could actually tame nature's waterways, which, as you can imagine, fundamentally changed global trade forever.
Moving right along to Part 2, evolution of wheels and rails, mastering the land.
Once we conquered water, human ambition quickly pivoted to mastering the land. And to see how this played out, just look at the bicycle. It was this rapid, totally incremental evolution. In 1790, the French invented the Solarifer. It was a wooden frame with two wheels that you literally had to push with your feet like a toddler's toy. You couldn't even steer it. Then, in 1816, a German inventor finally added a steering mechanism to create the Draisine. Fast forward to 1839, and a Scottish blacksmith named Kirkpatrick Macmillan figures out how to add pedals, meaning, hallelujah, you no longer had to drag your feet on the dirt. Finally, in 1867, the French introduced the velocipede, adding metal wheels and a pedal right on the front axle. It's like a giant puzzle where each invention systematically solved the exact problem left by the last guy.
But let's be real, early utility wasn't exactly comfortable. That 1867 velocipede I just mentioned, it earned a totally terrifying nickname, the Bone Shaker. Just to put this into perspective for you, this bike had zero modern suspension, and its metal and wood construction meant it weighed about 5 times more than the bike sitting in your garage right now. Riding it delivered a ride so violently bumpy that it literally rattled right through to your bones.
Now, while humans were shaking their teeth loose on early bikes, steam power was busy taking over the land. In 1814, an English mechanical engineer named George Stephenson invented the first self-propelled steam locomotive, famously called the Rocket. But honestly, the craziest part isn't the train itself, it's this specific number. 1,435 millimeters. That is the exact width of the track gauge Stephenson came up with. It was engineered so perfectly that it just became the international standard. Even today, the vast majority of railways across the entire globe still use George Stephenson's 1,435 millimeter gauge. I mean, talk about a lasting legacy.
Part 3, automobiles and aircraft, the need for speed.
As steam conquered the rails, inventors started dreaming about personal, flexible transport. They wanted to replace the horse-drawn carriage. So think about Carl Benz's world-changing 1885 invention. He built a steel and wood frame, put it on tires, and steered it with a tiller. The engine itself weighed 220 pounds, and it used a one-cylinder, four-stroke combustion system. It actually had incredibly modern concepts for the time, like a drip lubrication system and thermosiphon cooling, the whole shebang. Yet despite all of this mechanical genius, guess what it put out? A staggering 3/4 of a single horsepower.
Yep, you heard that right, 0.75 horsepower. And because of that, Benz's revolutionary first car had a top speed of just 16 kilometers per hour. That's roughly 10 miles per hour. It's a pretty humbling reminder of the tangible reality of early travel. Today, you could literally jog faster than the world's first car could drive. But that 16 kilometers per hour absolutely shattered the paradigm of relying on animals to get around.
And the mechanical utility era arguably reaches its absolute peak with this incredibly brief number, 12 seconds. For thousands of years, humans looked up and dreamed of flying. In 1903, two brothers with a high school education, Orville and Wilbur Wright, took this fragile contraption of wood, linen, and wire up into the air. That first successful human-controlled flight lasted a mere 12 seconds. Covering just 120 feet. But those 12 seconds were everything. They proved it was possible, and within just a few decades, we were flying across continents.
Which brings us to part 4, Rebels of Automotive Design. Enter the 1970s.
Okay, so we've solved the basic mechanical problems of moving on water, land, and air. Vehicles work, but what happens next? Well, once basic utility was handled, a new generation of designers started asking a very different question. How wild can we make it? You really have to understand the cultural vibe of the 70s. It was a time of immense, unbridled optimism. Humanity had just walked on the moon. The Concorde was flying people across the Atlantic at supersonic speeds. Electronic music and video games were bursting onto the scene. There was this collective pop culture belief that literally anything was possible. And this atmosphere birthed the golden era of independent Italian design studios, most notably Carrozzeria Bertone. They were essentially a playground for adults obsessed with cars, totally free from the boring constraints of corporate marketing departments.
Inside Bertone, we find this fascinating clash between two absolute giants of design. On one side, you have Marcello Gandini. He was the rock star rebel. Completely self-taught, he firmly believed in form over function. To him, cars were extreme art that should literally make you gasp. On the other side is Giorgetto Giugiaro, the populist genius. Giugiaro believed great design didn't have to be expensive, and he focused heavily on function and space. In fact, Giugiaro went on to design the first Volkswagen Golf, using these clean, straight lines to maximize interior space, completely saving VW from bankruptcy and basically defining the modern hatchback. But in the 70s, it was Gandini's artistic rebellion that totally captured the world's imagination.
Part 5. Golden Age of Wedge Cars, Driving the Future.
Gandini's artistic rebellion leads us perfectly into his ultimate mic drop, the wedge car. This was a vehicle driven purely by 1970s sci-fi imagination rather than anything resembling practicality. What is a wedge car? Well, they feature extreme cab-forward proportions, meaning they push the driver as far to the front as possible, a body so flat and low it looks like a doorstop, and a mid-engine layout. They entirely defy the traditional design and aerodynamic norms of the time. They look like UFOs that had just accidentally landed on a highway. You can actually track the rapid escalation of this era across a pretty tight timeline. It kicks off with the 1966 Canara I, which is one of the earliest wedge shapes. But things get radical in 1970 with the launch of Stratos HF0, and then just explode into pop culture dominance in 1974 with the legendary Lamborghini Countach. These weren't just cars, they were rolling statements of defiance.
Just think about the sheer madness of the 1970 Lancia Stratos HF0. Designed by Gandini. This is the definition of form completely overriding function. The car was so incredibly flat, so dedicated to its wedge shape that it literally didn't even have conventional doors. To get inside, the entire front windshield had to be unlatched and lifted up like a Tupperware lid, and you had to climb in over the steering column. I mean, it obviously wasn't built for comfort, it was built to prove that the shape of a car had absolutely zero limits.
But the undisputed king of the wedge era is for sure the 1974 Lamborghini Countach. The shape was pushed so far forward that the driver literally couldn't see out the back window. So what was Gandini's solution? He certainly didn't change the shape. Instead, he cut a literal periscope hole into the roof so the driver could use a special mirror to see backwards, the famous periscopio solution. He also invented those iconic upward swinging scissor doors, just so you could open them in tight parking spots. And what makes this car even more legendary is the timing. It dropped right during the 1973 oil crisis. While everyone else was panicking in lines for gas, Lamborghini released a massive, gas-guzzling V12 spaceship. It was pure, unapologetic rebellion, a dream machine meant to help people escape a boring reality.
And finally, Part 6, The Legacy of Design, Beyond the Wedge.
So what happened to all that rebellion? Did it just fade away as a groovy 70s fad? Absolutely not. The wedge era laid the actual DNA blueprint for modern performance cars. That mid-engine layout, the aggressive cab-forward stance, you can see that in almost every supercar today. But more importantly, it left a legacy of attitude. Think about our modern roads, which are increasingly filled with highly rounded, data-driven electric vehicles designed strictly by wind tunnels to maximize battery range. The wedge cars remind us that design doesn't always have to be driven by data and efficiency. Sometimes it should be driven by pure imagination and the courage to be completely different.
Which really brings us back to where we started today. Whether it's a piece of wood with metal wheels that shakes your bones to dust, or a V12 spaceship with doors that open to the sky, they are all part of the exact same continuum. As our source material beautifully reminds us,
A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Every single inventor and rebel designer we talked about today took that step, pushing humanity just a little bit further down the road.
And I want to leave you with this thought. Transportation isn't just about moving, it's a reflection of our culture. The 70s gave us aggressive, wild wedge cars to escape reality and dream of the future. So when you look at the highly optimized, silent, rounded, autonomous pods being designed today, ask yourself, what will the transportation designs of tomorrow say about our era? What exactly are we trying to escape from or drive toward? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope you look at the vehicles on your street a little differently today.